So, having briefly outlined what the gospel is, we're now going to turn to a more detailed look at its components. So, a right understanding of the gospel begins with a right understanding of God, that he is the righteous creator and that we are all accountable to him. And if you were with us on Thursday evening, we had a little bit of an exploration of that, just very top level, acknowledging that we're going to be going into a bit more depth over the next few weeks. So we're going to look into Genesis 2 this morning, which tells us in these short verses a lot about God himself, as well as introducing some ideas around our humanity. So a first point I want to make is that the observant reader will see that there seems possibly to be a contradiction from Genesis 1 to Genesis 2 in certain places. For example, in Genesis 1, God creates all the land vegetation first, and then on the sixth day, he makes man. And then in Genesis chapter 2, in verses 5 to 7, the opposite seems to be the case. But these are not contradictions. The writer of Genesis is simply telling the same story, but from different perspectives and with different genres of writing. So we just need to understand Genesis 1 is like the telescope view. It's a top level genealogy of creation. It's giving us an order and almost a lineage, whereas Genesis 2 is like the microscope view. So we're now zooming in and getting more detail. And the point is that these two chapters have different things to tell us. So we're not going to look too much at Genesis chapter 1, but what I want to say is that both of these chapters set the scene for chapter 3. So we're all aware of the state of mankind. We might need some education on that, but we all generally know what humankind is like. So what Genesis 1 and 2 does is to tell us what it was like in the beginning. And so that's what they're doing. They're giving us this overview and explaining in really quite a short space of time what it was like when God first made things. So just without totally skipping over chapter 1, I want to just share with you two important truths that you'll get from Genesis chapter 1. Firstly, that the heavens and the earth in all their vast array were created by God. That's the entire universe was created by God. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, which we saw right at the end of chapter 1, God saw all that he had made and he declared it very good. So when we look around the world today, we do see beauty. And in that first song we listened to, it was lovely to see all these different images from creation. I really like the little jellyfish, just marvelous, marvelous things. But we also see all the things that are broken in creation. And so Genesis chapter 1, and particularly verse 31, is important because God says it was all perfect in the beginning. What you see today is not what it once was like. So just want you to take those two things. You can go and look at Genesis 1 in more detail later on. But firstly, God created all things. And secondly, he created all things very good. Those are two things you'll learn from Genesis chapter 1. So then we're going to come to the uniqueness of God as the creator. And there we go. Yeah, that's working. Now, this may seem like a very simple observation to make. But it's important. And here are some of the things that we learn. Firstly, God alone is the creator. He is the only creator in this story. You'll notice everything else is created, but only God can create, and only God can create out of nothing. We use this term creation ex nihilo, and it means out of nothing. So before the universe, there was nothing. God created all things. Human beings never create, or at least not in the same way that God does. We can take a lump of clay and we can make a beautiful pottery vase. Some of you remember doing that at school. I remember making some not quite so beautiful things when I was at school, but nevertheless, you had the clay and you put it on the wheel and you make something. But we can't create the clay itself. So we can make things, we can fashion things, we can form them, we can shape them, we can build things, but we cannot create anything in the way that God creates. So that's the first thing, only God creates. The second thing is that God as Trinity is creator. So we actually have the Trinity present in the work of creation. Obviously, we've got God. In the beginning, God created. And if you looked in the early verses of Genesis 1, you'll see the Spirit of God hovering over the waters. Now, Jesus isn't mentioned in Genesis, but he is mentioned when we come to the New Testament. In Colossians chapter 1, this is what Paul says. The Son of God, Jesus, is the firstborn over all creation, for in him, Jesus, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authority. All things have been created through him and for him. And Paul here is saying the same thing as the Apostle John. In his gospel, he writes, in the beginning was the Word. He's talking about Jesus here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He, Jesus, was with God in the beginning. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. So we see Father, Spirit, and Son all present in creation. And you'll notice also when God comes to make humankind, he has a conversation with himself. Let us make man in our own image. So we have the Trinity active in creation. Thirdly, God is creator, not created. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this question. I'm sure you have, from an atheist or a skeptic who says, well, if God made everything, who made God? And atheists seem to think this is the cleverest question of all. Who made God? Well, it's a nonsense question. And if anybody ever asks you that, you need to say to them, let me try and phrase your question for you. You're asking, who made the being that is unmade? Who started the God who has no start? What was the beginning of a God who has no beginning? In Revelation 1, Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. These are the letters of the Greek alphabet. Who is in the present, who was in the past, and who is to come, the Almighty. That's in Revelation 1. Right at the end, in Revelation 22, he says again, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. God is eternal. God is the creator. He is not created. Nobody made God, and nobody is going to trip you up with such a question as who made God. You simply say, nobody made God. He is the creator of all things. He is not created. And then just lastly here on the uniqueness of God as creator, he is creator and ruler, and that's what we want to really drive into this morning. We get a sense of God's majesty and his rule. You see, the creator of something is by nature its owner, isn't it? The person who creates a work of art is the owner. Now, of course, there are all these wonderful works by Picasso and Rembrandt and Van Gogh. You know, some of these works worth millions and millions. We've had the pleasure of going to the Vatican Museum in Rome, and you look around and you're just faced with artwork after sculpture of just magnificent beauty. And of course, the artists are all dead now. But at the time, and in one sense, even now, they are the owner of that work because it was by their handiwork that the painting or the sculpture was created. So the creator is by nature the owner of that thing. And as created beings, we're not simply evolved beings, we are created. We belong to God. We are under his ownership, under his rule, under his kingship. So just 4 things there about the uniqueness of God as creator. So now we want to just look at the creation itself, and we're going to be noticing a few things here. So the first thing is that the creation was God perfected. So remember I mentioned there in verse 31 of chapter 1, God saw all that he made and it was very good. And he says this, notice before this he'd said, God said that it was good. God saw that it was good. God saw that it was good. On the 6th day, he said it was very good. Now, it's possible that having created man, he said it was very good. Or, perhaps more likely, God saw that having created man, everything was complete. He'd finished his work of creation. And of course, on the 7th day, he rested. So having created everything, he declared it very good. It is a sense of completion. It is a picture of perfection. When I was working at Harwell campus in marketing, we used to have a graphic design company. We used to outsource to them, and they were very good. And there were a couple of designers there. One lady called Jin, who I used to work with, and I remember she sent me some artwork over, and then a couple of minutes later she said she sent me something else and said, "Oh, can you ignore the last one because there was a problem with it? Can you use this one instead?" So I opened them both and I couldn't see any difference, and I said to her, "Can I just ask you what was the difference between them?" And so she told me, and she said, "Honestly, nobody would have noticed, but it really bugged me." And for those people who are designers or artists, that tends to be what happens. The tiniest imperfection that nobody would notice, we can spend days and weeks incessantly tinkering with it until we're happy with the result. And I guess actually no artist is ever really perfectly happy with what they've made. But that isn't the case with the grand designer, God. When he finished his creation, he didn't keep on tinkering with it. He said it was very good. He is perfection, and all his works are perfect. And that first creation was absolutely perfect. So the world that we see today is not how it once was, and it's not how it ought to be. It was perfect in every way. So the creation was God perfected. Secondly, the creation was God breathed. So I wanted to look at chapter 2 because chapter 1 just tells us that God created man and woman. But Genesis 2 gives us a bit more of a picture of what this was like. So we call them Adam and Eve, and they're not really names. They were real people, but Adam and Eve are not really their names. They are more descriptions. And what it means is, Adam means from the earth. So he is literally an earthling. And one writer said, I don't like using the word earthling because it sounds like something from a science fiction novel. So he calls him a dirtling. But I think that's a bit crude. So I'm going to call him an earthling. And notice that Adam is unique from all the animals, from everything else that was made, because Adam didn't truly become alive until God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And this aspect of man became a central part of Paul's preaching when he was in Athens. Look here at Acts 17. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. You notice the rule here. God is the owner and the ruler. He is the Lord of heaven and earth. He does not live in temples built by human hands, and he's not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, God himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. So human beings have the breath of God within them. Nothing truly lives without the breath of God. And that is literally true. If we stop breathing, we die. But it's spiritually true too, because to be born again is to be born by the Spirit of God. His life is breathed into us. So even though your neighbor may be perfectly fit and healthy, may even be more fit and healthy than you, they're not truly made alive. And that's the language that we see in the New Testament. Paul says to the Ephesians, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. So God breathes his life, and then we are made alive. So the creation, particularly the creation of man, was God breathed. And then we see that the creation was God blessed. Look in verse 9 here. The Lord God made all kinds of trees grow out of the ground, trees that were pleasing to the eye and good for food. Now, isn't that, just stop and think about this for a moment. God didn't simply plant a load of trees and shrubs and things and just kind of dot some edible stuff around. He made, firstly, all kinds of trees to grow. So God gave us amazing variety. Secondly, he made them pleasing to the eye. Have you ever looked at a flower or a tree and you thought to yourself, you know, it's just a thing. Why does it have such amazing beauty? If you look at the bunches of flowers, even in the supermarkets, and you see them, and there's yellows, and there's oranges, and there's purples, and it's just absolutely breathtaking. God infused his creation with artistry and beauty to take our breath away. But God made them good for food, not simply edible. You know, when you look at the nature programs or you go to a safari park and there's the lions and they've just got this big slab of raw meat and they just kind of chew it and wolf it down. Well, we have amazing tastes. One of my favorite smells ever is garlic and onions just softly frying in a pan. The smell is absolutely heavenly. So God gave us all of these things, these herbs and these spices, and you put them all together and you've got these incredible tastes. So God blessed the creation. He blessed mankind with beauty, and he blessed him with an abundance. Everything they could need, they had. So the creation was God blessed. And then we see that the creation was God ruled. And this is the last thing I want to bring to you here in verse 15 to 17. There was something very important about the relationship that man had with God. Firstly, man was given purpose. Now, I don't know how you're feeling about Monday morning. I have a friend who's not a Christian, and certainly in the past, he's spent most of Sunday getting worked up about Monday work. That's sort of what's on his mind for the whole of Sunday. So he really only gets to enjoy Friday night and Saturday in his weekend, and then he's worrying about work on Monday. And some of us might be thinking, what am I going to face in the office tomorrow? And sometimes we loathe work. And sometimes we think, wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to work? But work is not a consequence of sin. Actually, work was there from the beginning. God placed Adam in the garden, and he asked him to work it and take care of it. Now, isn't that interesting? Even though the creation was perfect, God says to Adam, I want you to go to work in this garden. You're going to look after it. You're going to tend and you're going to keep it. So man wasn't simply given life. God didn't just zap a hammock between two palm trees and say, there you go, take it easy in this paradise. Man was given purpose. He was given work to do. So man was given purpose. Secondly, man was given provision. Remember again that there is all of these amazing trees in the garden, and he's free to eat from any of them in the garden. Variety, beauty, taste. He was given an abundance of provision. And that is the God that we have. We're reminded here, aren't we, of the, I've mentioned it so many times, the feeding of the 5,000. Not only did God feed all those people, but there were 12 baskets left over. That is the abundance of God's provision. So that's what he did in the garden. Everything that Adam needed, bearing in mind they were vegetarian to start with, he had so much variety to enjoy. And thirdly, man was given prohibitions. It's not quite true that he was given any tree in the garden, because one of those trees remained off limits. God said to him, you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And not only did God prohibit him from eating from that tree, he also set consequences. This was not an empty warning. He says, when you eat of it, you will certainly die. So man was given purpose, he was given provision, and he was given prohibitions. And when God set those conditions, he was setting himself as the ruler. So man had dominion over all of the earth. He was given rulership over the earth, but ultimately man was under the authority of God. Just want to bring you one last point here about God's perfect works and his perfect justice as we look in Deuteronomy 32. I will proclaim the name of the Lord. This is what Moses sings. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. Moses talks about the works of God being perfect, and we've seen that in this creation story we've briefly looked at this morning. All of God's works were very good. Perfect life, perfect beauty, perfect variety, perfect provision, and even perfect boundaries. And Moses says, all of God's ways are just. He is a faithful God who does no wrong. Upright and just is he. And what we'll come on to see is that Satan came along and he got Adam and Eve to question the goodness and the justice of God. If God really loved you, if he was a really good God, he would never have set these prohibitions. He would never have set boundaries. He would have let you do whatever you want. But Moses reminds us that all of God's works are perfect, and God himself is perfect. This sums up everything about the Lord. His works are perfect. It was very good in the beginning. And all his ways are just, as we saw in the way that he ruled, even in those early days of Adam and Eve. He set boundaries for them, but he also gave them an abundance. Those boundaries wouldn't have been a problem because they had so much to enjoy. So I encourage you to reflect on this passage and these thoughts from Genesis chapter 2, which tell us about God, the perfect creator, and God the perfect ruler. And these verses in Deuteronomy should challenge and sustain us that God is not just our creator, but he is also our righteous judge. And even in the beginning, before there was sin, he established his rule as the righteous judge. God is to be praised for his greatness as the creator and as the judge. And we are to submit to him as the creator and our judge.